My name is Steve Freeman, and I work with Edina Realty. I'm a realtor with 21 years of experience. And at this point, I'm going to tell you my wiggly path and how I got to the point that I am now. I grew up in California, in Yorba Linda, the birthplace of Richard M. Nixon, and went to the Richard Nixon Elementary High School, which is now the Richard Nixon Library. At the time that I grew up, which was in the 50s and 60s, it was still very congested and extremely smoggy. And where I grew up, it was really in the barley fields, which, as I go back and visit now, is packed just neighbor to neighbor, house to house, from San Diego to Santa Barbara. I really wanted to live someplace else and happened to meet my ex-wife in junior college in California, and she was from the Twin Cities here in Minnesota. And having fallen in love, I followed her back here on my motorcycle in April, which I learned was a little cooler than what I expected it to be. But found that I really did like it. I was able to acclimate during the summertime, get used to Minnesota, and I must say I was so excited when I could see my breath for the first time. Now when I see my breath, I'm panic-filled. But at any rate, when I first came here from high school to the point that I lived here, and for about 5 years afterwards, I actually painted cars. I did not go on to college other than the junior college stint that I did, and realized that at some point in that career I'd hit the income limit of what I was going to earn, and that it really is a young man's game. So I began to look around for other things that I might be able to do that would lead to a more stable income. So I considered getting into sales, which I found was not as stable as I was hoping it would be initially. The transition was difficult because coming from the trades and getting into sales, there's a different language and there's a different mindset and there's a different set of skills needed when you're dealing with the public versus working on the cars for the public. And it took me a long time to learn not just the ins and outs of real estate itself, but primarily how to work with people and how to talk with people. I would consider myself to be more of an introvert than an extrovert. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm about a 4 and leaning more towards an introvert, which took me a long time to get over, to learn those skills of being able to talk with people and develop conversations and develop a rapport. Real estate really is a business of relationships. And so getting to that point was interesting for me, and I would say that for the first 3 years I pretty much starved to death and spent most of my time avoiding interaction with people as opposed to getting out there and really working with people and understanding their situation. And so it was pretty hard for me, and there came a point of desperation that I needed to either consider getting back into painting cars or changing the way that I work in my real estate career. So I began to look at it differently. I actually went to Toastmasters, and I learned a valuable lesson in Toastmasters, and it was more chit-chat, learning how to be able to talk with people without feeling strained or thinking about what I'm going to say next. And I did that for a year. I did 10 speeches. I became a competent Toastmaster and actually did a speech competition, and the largest group I spoke to was about 150 people in a competition. And that was pretty exciting. But what I learned was that I can communicate, but most importantly that is a skill, and that it's one that needs not only to be learned but practiced as well. So it's taken me a while to be able to learn that and to be able to learn the skills of the real estate knowledge background that I have and marry those two to be able to communicate well with my clients. Now, initially, when I got into real estate, I really didn't know where to begin. And like most people, I made a common mistake. I started doing everything I could with every person that I talked to. I, for a time, sold apartment buildings, or tried to. I sold one. I sold or showed farms. I would show commercial property. I would do anything I could where I could be in front of a person to talk with that person and be able to move them further down the road, hopefully to a sale for them and a commission for me. And what I found was that, like the old saying, master of, what's the phrase? Peter, help me with the phrase.
Something like jack of all trades and master of none.
Jack of all trades, master of none. And I was a master of none. I actually worked with a performance coach, is what they called him at the time. He ended up being a good friend of mine, Jim Early. And Jim led me down the road and allowed me to make my own decisions that I needed to find a source, a way of working one particular method of real estate and then sticking with that. And I really was leaning towards working with first-time home buyers. And the reason being is that I was pretty young at the time, and I felt an affinity with people my own age, and most of those were first-time home buyers. So in order to develop that business, I needed to put I needed to develop methods of going from when I first met these people all the way to the point that after the closing, I continued to keep in contact with those people and everything in between. So it actually developed a pipeline. And the way that I did this was I partnered with a mortgage banker. Her name was Twyla Hanks. And we did our program for about 8 years together. And at the time, we would advertise in the Star and Tribune newspaper. And we would take quarter-page ads, which cost $1,000 every time we ran the ads. And we would get anywhere from 5 to 30 people at our first-time home buyer seminars. Now, again, this was the Star Tribune, and at a time when people actually read newspapers and ads, which doesn't happen anymore. But I would say that for the first 2 years, if I had 10 people come to the seminar, I would end up working with 2, maybe 3 couples out of each seminar. And we really began to learn as we went through the seminar. As an example, I would get up and talk for 45 minutes about real estate construction and what to look for when you're looking to buy a new home. And then Twyla would get up and talk about the mortgage loan process, how long it would take, what you would need for qualifying, what your income ratios needed to be. And we really gave them really good information for that hour and a half time period. It was very soft sell. And at the end, I simply said, we want to give you this information to help you with your decision process, and we would like to be a part of that. If you're interested, please give us a call, and we would hand out our information. So for 2 years, we continued that. We improved the information that we presented at each seminar. All the participants would fill out an information sheet asking how we did, what would you like to see, and that helped us a lot. After about 2 years, I had an epiphany. I actually began calling people the following Monday after the seminar and asking them simply if they would like to meet, as opposed to just inviting them. I would invite them and do a follow-up phone call. And I went from working with 2 to 3 to working with between 5 and 7 from each webinar or seminar. And that really increased the ability of me to work with more people. And towards the end of that process, I was selling between 30 and 50 homes per year. And I felt very comfortable. And also during that same time period, I was buying and selling homes and fixing them up and doing some rehabs on them. So my depth of knowledge about real estate also increased. So that when I worked with a first-time home buyer, and I still use this today, when I work with first-time home buyers, I start with structure and condition of the home. We talk about mechanicals, we look at the roof. And when I take people out initially, I take them in, I show them between 6 and 10 houses each time that we go out, and that is probably 2 to 3 times that I take them out. I do it that way. And I just educate them to the process. As we're going through homes, I'll talk with them about the furnace, hot water heater, the electrical systems, foundation. I'll show them what I look for in foundations. I show them support posts, everything that they don't know about. And my goal is to help educate them to the point that when they find the right house, they can make the decision by themselves, and it's an educated decision. And I find that people really feel that process to be very comforting. They do often ask my opinion about things, but they never look at me after the first time out and look at me as being the issue instead of the issue is them finding the right house for them. I really do talk with people about buying the right house. We talk about resale a lot. And when it comes to resale, most people, especially first-time home buyers, when they buy a property, they want to get into a house and they don't think about the impact of that particular home when they go to sell. For instance, if they buy a 2-bedroom and they begin to have a family, very quickly they need to move out of that house. So I try to lean people towards 3-bedroom homes if we can get into it in the price range that they're in, or find them a home with enough space that they could turn it into a 3-bedroom. Most importantly, that when they begin a family, they don't have to move right away. I also talk about different factors that impact resale. That could be living on a busy street. It could be living near commercial property. I showed a home this weekend that was in the Seward location of Minneapolis and 2 houses away from a commercial building. And what I explain to the buyers is that at any given time, there's a pool of buyers in the marketplace. And they want what everybody else is looking for in that price range. And if they look at your home next door to a commercial property, it's going to narrow down the pool of buyers that would be interested in looking at that house. So my goal is to try to find properties that maintain that larger pool of buyers. And so working with the buyers that I work with in order to let them know and think about that part of the process. Often you can get more house for the money if it's on a busy street. But you need to look beyond that because you really don't know if that's the best price that you can get for that house. And you don't know that until you sell the house. Then you know if you got a good price or not. If you live in the home for 20 to 30 years, you probably don't have to worry about it because it's going to increase in value enough that it's going to cover any short-term mistake that you may have made with either location or condition of the property. So, I initially got licensed in real estate in 1978, and in 1998, my wife and I left on a big adventure. But let me tell you how I got to the big adventure before I tell you what that was. When I began working with Jim Early, the performance coach that I mentioned earlier, I had mentioned to him that I had a 10-year goal. And that was that I wanted to quit what I was doing and move aboard a sailboat and take my son and I and go sailing for a year. And that what I was doing currently with my business was not going to allow that to happen, and I needed him to help me grow my business so that I could afford to buy a boat and that I could afford to be gone for that time period. That's why we developed the buyer seminars and specializing with first-time home buyers. So every decision that I made in building my business was based on how is this going to help my goal and how can I tie those two together. And I found myself thinking not only more about how to work my business so that it would help that goal, but also it made me work more towards the goal itself. It kept it in the front of my mind. And it really gave me motivation to work harder and to work smarter and to move closer every day towards that goal. Little by little, it really is the small steps that after you turn around and look behind you, you think, oh my God, look how far I've gone. And I don't know about how you are, but me personally, when I'm building a business like I am today, again, I look back, or actually I don't look back enough, and see the achievements that I've done to get to where I am now. And I have to consciously turn around and look behind me and say, oh, I've done this, and I've done this, and I put that together, so I am hitting my goals. So that now I can look forward and it makes it easier for me to visualize what needs to continue to be done and how that is associated with what my goals are. So with Jim's help, we were able to develop what he called developing the goose that lays the golden egg, which was the home buyer seminar pipeline that I talked about. And we would develop pre-meeting information, pre-seminar information that I would hand out to the participants. At the meeting, I would do handouts at the meeting. They would follow along. I would give them a pamphlet at the end of the meeting. I would do my phone call, invite them into the office. I would have another pamphlet that would hit all the points that I needed to talk about with them at our initial meeting and setting up how we were going to go about looking at homes. So that as I thought about the whole process and what every buyer had gone through previous that I had worked with, I developed all of those written systems in place so that I could then inform the buyer and they would be much more informed about the process itself. And then after the sale took place, I would do follow-up with the mortgage banker and the title company and the closing company to make sure that everything was done so that when we got to the closing, there were no issues at the closing. I told everybody that I worked with my goal at the closing was to get drowsy. I look at one piece of paper, the first one that's presented, and if that looks good, then I'm done, and the closing takes place. All the way from after the closing to continuing follow-up with those people in the hopes of getting referral business. So I really built those systems with Jim's help. And as the years progressed, I got better at what I did. I was able to then purchase my boat along with my wife, Kate, who I'd met in between this process. I got together with her in year 5 of the 10-year goal. And in fact, when I met with her initially, as we were dating, I said, I need to let you know something. In 5 years, I'm going to move aboard a sailboat and I'm going to leave Minnesota. If you would like to do that, then we can continue going out. But if you don't, then maybe we should not be doing this. And it seems kind of harsh now when I look back on it, but it was part of the decision process that every decision that was made was to get towards that goal. And luckily, I actually met her in a sailing venue. So made things much easier. And she was very interested and intrigued with the idea too. So as I worked for those remaining 5 years, we bought a boat 3 years away from the goal. The boat needed a lot of work. I fell in love with a fixer-upper, and I wish I would have never done that. But at the same time, I knew the boat, and it was built for us. I actually gutted the whole interior of the boat. It's the worst rehab I've ever done. There is not a square area in a boat, I found out. And so it took a long time for me to get the boat in good shape for us to leave. Everything was off of the fiberglass interior. The boat was rewired, replumbed, put refrigeration, just everything. And finally, in 1998, we were to the point that I needed to start ramping down my real estate business. Now, part of my goal was that I would sell my business to someone that would take it over. And I would train that person how to do that. So year 3, I started working with some of my managers and regional managers at Edina Realty to formulate a way that we could do this. And we actually went out and found someone that would be interested in working with me to transition from my business over to them. And the idea being that I would train them how to do the business, I would train them how to run the program, and then they would pay me a referral fee of business that they got over a period of years, and it would decline pretty much after the 3rd year down to almost nothing. And we worked hard on that. And within, I would say about 6 months before I left, when the time frame was coming close for this person to perform on their own, they got cold feet and they left the business. Oh well, we tried what we could, and that part didn't work out. So I just had to back up and decide I'm just going to have to let the business go. I worked out with a couple of agents in my office that they would take the business that would come in that people were calling for me, and they would work on it. I would get any referrals from that. And as normal, it didn't work out because they weren't me. So at the end of, by I say June of 98, I was pretty much spending all of my time up in Duluth on Lake Superior where the boat was located. By that time we were renting. I owned a 4-plex that I had rehabbed and was in good shape, and I had given over to a management company. And we spent probably the last 2 months up in Duluth getting the boat finally ready for our big adventure. And at that point, it was getting pretty exciting for us. We would come down to the cities and try to get all of the materials that we needed. We would go to the boat store, which I used to love going to hardware stores, and then I ended up loving going to the boat store, which was really expensive to go to. But it was a lot of fun. One of the things that I bought, as an example, I went into West Marine and I needed to get a handheld VHF radio. So here I am in Minnesota, and I don't know what I'm looking at, and I turn the thing on and I hear that it's got a pre-recorded weather alert and that there's strong tornadoes in the area. And I'm listening to this when I look out the window, and it's very dark and actually green outside, you know, that hurricane looking cloud formation. And it was like, oh my God, it's here. It's bad weather here. And my van was sitting outside. I could see my van, and there was golf ball size hail hitting my van, breaking the windows and dimpling my van all over. Now, what's ironic is that I was going to sell my van, and I received a $3,000 insurance claim for my van and then sold it to somebody the way that it was. So it was just something else I could put into the cruising kitty, like manna from heaven. By the time that we were ready to go, my wife and I had over 20 years of sailing experience, but it was all lake sailing. And some of it was actually down in the Caribbean. We had chartered on Lake Superior, we had chartered on Lake Michigan, we had chartered down in the Virgin Islands, and also in the Grenadines, which is the southern eastern Caribbean, just north of Venezuela, Trinidad area. So I felt that we had enough experience to go. And I'm here to tell you now that the experience we had was nice, but it was wholly lacking for what we ended up learning as we were out really living on the boat and experiencing weather on a day-to-day basis. July of 1998, we left from Duluth, Minnesota. We left the marina and went through the harbor towards Duluth and went under the lift bridge, which, if anybody knows Duluth, that's an icon for actually Minnesota. And they opened the lift bridge for us. It was like on a Wednesday afternoon. We sailed out underneath it, and as I'm going out of the harbor onto Lake Superior, I took the pager from my pocket that I had for my business, and I threw it in the water, freeing myself. And then I realized it was a leased pager, so I kept getting bills for it, which I ended up having to pay off. But we sailed east on Lake Superior, and we stopped every night. It took us 10 days to get off of Lake Superior. Now, Lake Superior is a pretty unforgiving lake, and the direction that we were going would be in the direction of any storms or strong winds from the east on Lake Superior. And so we would sail as far as we could, and being July, we had light from 5 in the morning until about 10 o'clock at night. So it was the longest that we could go. And made it to the Apostle Islands the first night, which is about a 10 to 12 hour motor sail. We motored most of the way. And the only really rough weather that we had on Lake Superior was that we were on the Michigan side of the Upper Peninsula. I think that's still Wisconsin down there. And we were at the very base of the hand down here and began our morning going northbound to go around the peninsula. And it's about an 8-hour sail or motor. And a storm came up, and it progressively got worse and worse. And by the time we got within 15 miles of where we were going to turn in, it was so bad that we were taking water over the deck, and it was coming down and splashing into the cockpit. And Lake Superior water is cold. Even in July, it's in the 50s. We realized that those 15 miles that we needed to go would probably take us another 6 hours, because in the best of weather, we can do 5 miles an hour. That would have been 15, but in these conditions, we were only progressing by 2 miles an hour. So we decided to turn around, and we sailed back. We got back very quickly because the wind was behind us at that point. And when we got back down to the bottom of that little hand, I realized that we were in for a little bit of trouble, because the little passage that we came out of now had rolling waves going into it, and that we had to time our entrance to get in that little cut perfectly to ride it with a wave going in. I felt pretty confident because I had 20 years of experience, but when I saw a fisherman's eyes standing on the jetty as I was coming in, I realized, oh my God, what am I doing here? But we rode it in, we made it, and that was the first night, the first time on our trip that I thought, wow, we were lucky that time. That's a learning lesson. I'll remember that one next time. So we finally got off of Lake Superior, and we went in through Sault Ste. Marie. And it was, at that point, the Canadian 4th of July. I don't know what date that is. I think it was the 10th when we got into Canada. And they were going to shoot off fireworks. And we had been on the water for 10 hours. They said, just, stay up. You'll want to see these fireworks. Well, we were quite far north, and it didn't get dark till midnight. And they shot the fireworks off. I was so happy to get to bed. I couldn't believe it. From there, we went through the North Channel, which was beautiful. We saw so many neat things in Lake Superior and on the other lakes, Lake Huron. As an example, we went on the Canadian side. There were so many places that we went to. There was one anchorage or marina that we went to on the, what would that be, the shore of Canada. I'm trying to think of the name of the marina that we were in the town, and it's not coming to me. But they played bagpipes as the sun set. And the story behind it was there was a Scottish man who went back to Europe to bring his new bride home to his new country. And when they came, it was stormy and foggy on Lake Superior. And so he pulled his bagpipes out, and somebody heard on shore, and they played the bagpipes and called him into the harbor. Stories like this we heard all the time. From there, we went through Lake Erie, all the way through the Erie Canal. We didn't go through the final fifth Great Lake. We instead went through the Erie Canal, and I'm so surprised by the beauty of the Erie Canal, especially the first half where we went in at Buffalo, I believe it was. And all of those pretty towns in upstate New York, you go through, and each town was given $1 million to build their dock area or their town around the canal. So we would stop at night, and you could tie up for free. People would come and talk to us as we were sitting on our boat, invite us to their homes. They were just so welcoming. And as we went through the Erie Canal, we began to hit locks. I believe there's like 42 locks from Buffalo to the Hudson River. And all of the experiences, we saw deer crossing the canal as we were heading down. Just beautiful, beautiful locations. We also went through a tornado, which we were at one particular town, and it went over that town and hit the town directly next to us. And the following day we went through and saw a damaged gas station, and a McDonald's were completely leveled. And we were pretty lucky. I was surprised. That's probably the closest I've been to a tornado. And then we went on to the Hudson. My son actually met us at the top of the Hudson with his girlfriend, and we sailed down the Hudson to, I think the first stop that we had was just across from the military academy. What's the military academy, Peter? West Point. West Point. And my son and his girlfriend wanted to go over and take a look at West Point. And in my update that I sent to friends, I said, I've never been so proud to see my son go off to West Point. Of course, he came back that night. But we continued on down to New York City. And my wife and I had never been to New York. I think my son had been once before. But we were able to stay at the 10th Street Boat Basin. And it was, that's not the 10th, it's like the 97th Street Boat Basin, something. But it's a mooring ball, a field of mooring balls. And you just sail up to it, and you catch it with the boat hook, and you tie your line through and tie onto that. And that was $10 a day to stay on that in New York City, which was so inexpensive. We could walk off to Central Park. We stayed for 10 days. With the exception of one night, we went over to New Jersey and stayed in a marina because my son and his girlfriend were going to go clubbing, and I wanted to make sure that they could get back because the Hudson has pretty strong current, and they wouldn't have been able to make it back on the dinghy. So we went into a marina, which was $200 a night, and that was quite a shock after being on a $10 mooring. From there, we said goodbye to New York. My son and his girlfriend flew back to the Twin Cities, and we sailed out and did our first overnight passage from the New York harbor. We sailed outside in the ocean down to New Jersey to Cape May and pulled into Cape May. Now, while we were waiting for a good weather window leaving the New York harbor, we met another boat. And we ended up sailing with that boat and seeing them over here and over there probably for 3 months until we got to the Bahamas. That was the last place that we saw them. And when we made our passage, we left as the sun was setting so that we could make sure to arrive Cape May during the daylight hours the next day. And one thing I was surprised about was sailing outside of New Jersey. I expected there to be lights all the way down the coast. And there were places that there were no lights. We had kind of a strong wind, probably blowing 20, 25 knots, which was more than what we would have wished to be out in. And there was cloud cover, so we had no light from the moon, we had no starlight, and we had to rely on GPS. And it was the first time really for us that we were sailing at night in an area that we didn't know, and it was really outside of our comfort zone. So it was one more learning lesson. And we buddy boated with these people that we met, and we would be on the radio talking with them throughout the night. And when I was on watch, the woman on the other boat would be on watch, and she would talk about her fear and just follow my light on the back, because we had a white light on the stern, which is protocol, and just follow that light. And I realize now that a single white light is it may be a mile away, it could be 10 feet away. You don't know how far away that light really is. And she really was very close the whole way going across. But we ended up staying the next day we got into Cape May, and ended up staying in the Trump Casino Hotel Marina, which again was very expensive, as you can guess, but it was nice getting off the ocean. And it was still pretty windy when we left the next day, but it was a short hop to get around to the opening to, wasn't the Chesapeake, it was a river that goes up to the headwaters of the Chesapeake. Can't remember that. That's where Cape May sits. But at any rate, then we went up to enter the Chesapeake at the north end of the Chesapeake, and we hit that area of the Chesapeake. Now it was late September, early October. And what was truly wonderful about this was that vacations were over, and we really had the Chesapeake to ourselves. And we began working our way down the Chesapeake, sailing from one side of the Chesapeake across to the other side. And it was such a comforting sail to be able to go across the Chesapeake in one day and find a nice anchor spot. I think we probably spent maybe 2 weeks, maybe a little bit more, in the Chesapeake. We had one situation where a friend of ours we met from Minnesota, actually. We were in part of a club of 6 people that were going to go sailing from Minnesota, and they were actually in New York and were there during a tornado that came through, and they suffered boat damage, and they were able to get down to Cape May where we saw them. No, actually it was in the Chesapeake. And so we looked them up, and we went to the marina that they were at, and we took them out sailing to give them a break of their boat projects. And that was the first place that we got to use our spinnaker. And our spinnaker was, the name of our boat was Soul Dance, and our spinnaker was a caricature of my wife's logo for her business, which is a caricature of a dancing person with sunlight coming out of their heart or out of their soul. And that character was 8 by 8 on the spinnaker, so that when you opened it up, poof, there it was, red on white, just a beautiful feel. It was great. And the people that we were sharing the ride with on our boat were racers. And we happened to get into a small grudge match race with another boat. Didn't know them, but it was a lot of fun. Just the beginning of more things that we could share with other boaters as we were out on our big adventure. From there we continued to go back and forth across and ended up at the Norfolk, which is, of course, the naval base in Norfolk. And from there, we went through what's called the Dismal Swamp, and that took us down into the Carolinas and to Elizabeth, Port Elizabeth. It's a city, I believe, in North Carolina. And we ended up, because of pretty strong winds, we were going to, from there we needed to leave into a fairly shallow sound, large body of water that was shallow, and when wind hits that, you end up with short, choppy seas very quickly. So we were looking for a good weather window, and it got really cold. It was now late November, or mid-November at this point, and the day that we finally got to leave Elizabeth City, we had ice on our deck. We really had to get out of there. And so we left Elizabeth City and just continued working our way down with many stops at some really quaint North Carolina towns. South Carolina, we stopped in Beaufort, and continue to meet people all the way down. Every place that we went, we would meet a new group. Now, the people that we met, some of them went all the way down and some of them didn't. But one thing I found with a boating community is that you meet a group of friends, and you know that when you separate, that you may never see them again, but you most likely will see them again someplace else, because we're all going the same direction. We're all looking for the same things, and every harbor that we go to, you're looking for diesel fuel, water, laundromats, and a grocery store. So the first thing you do when you get to a new port is you end up talking to a boat anchored next to you and asking them, hey, where do I find those 4 things? You end up on their boat for a glass of wine in the evening and talking about what their plans are, where they've been, what they've experienced. We spent quite a bit of time in Savannah, Georgia, and once we left Savannah, Georgia, we did our first, what I consider to be our major outside passage. A friend of mine by the name of Craig Kamen joined us, my wife and I, at Savannah, and we went from Savannah. We sailed down to mid-state Florida, to near, not Port St. Lucie, it's mid-state, it'll probably come to me later. But we needed an extra crew member, someone to help with the watches. And we went out and found a little harbor that we would stage in. And we had dropped Kate off, my wife, to go do some grocery shopping, and we were going to go pick her up. And Craig and I anchored in this little harbor, and when we were anchoring, we had the dinghy tied off the back, and the line from the dinghy was from the dinghy to the boat, and I was backing the boat up, making sure that the anchor was set. So you back, here's the anchor here, and you pull back so that the anchor sets. And as I was backing up, the prop ran over the painter and wrapped on the prop itself and killed the engine. And when that happens, it wraps so tight, the only way to get it off is to cut it off. And with any luck, you don't blow up the engine and you don't bend the shaft for the prop. Well, I didn't bend the shaft, I didn't blow up the engine, but I wrapped that line so tight that somebody had to go in the water. So Craig offered to jump in, and he got his swimsuit on and jumped in and climbed out. I've never seen anybody in and out of the water so fast. It was probably 62 degrees, and you would spend so much time trying to catch your breath that he couldn't work underwater, and I tried it, and same thing. We ended up having to call what's called Towboat US, and they came, and somebody with a warm suit, it's a wet suit that they can actually get warm in, had to dive down and cut that off, $200. And the next day we were able to leave for our passage, and it was 3 overnights to go down to where we were going to come in at in Florida. A couple of experiences during that passage. One was that as we were going past Cape Canaveral, we were probably 5 miles offshore. And we noticed, you can see ships. There's a lot of shipping, of course, on the coast of Florida. And you can tell which way the ships are going by how their running lights appear to you on your boat. When every boat is required to have a red light and a green light, and then a mast light, and on the stern, a white light. So if you look, you can see, based on, if you only see a green light, then you know that that boat is going to cross you from showing their starboard side. If you see a red light, you know that you see their port side. If you see both a red and green light, they're coming right at you. As we were coming past Cape Canaveral, there was shipping coming out of the harbor. And we saw a ship that continued to get larger, and we could see their red and green light very clearly. And we kept trying to raise them on the radio. Of course, for them, they're finally out in the open water, and they shut their radio off. So we had to do evasive action to get away from an 800-foot container ship. So that was the first one. What ended up happening with our watches is we would do 2 hours on, 2 hours off. Craig didn't feel comfortable by himself, so my wife and I would take us a watch, and I would take a watch. And they called me up on one watch because there was a fire on the horizon, and Craig was convinced there was a ship on fire. So they called me up, and I looked at it for about a minute and a half and said, "No, that's a star coming up over the horizon." They're like, "No, that's a ship and it's on fire. Look how bright it is." And I said, just wait. And finally, after about 5 minutes, you could see now that there was a gap between the fire on the ship and the ship itself. It was the horizon coming up. And it was one of the brightest stars, which is Venus. And it happened to be coming up over the horizon. So kind of a humorous story. And so then we finally were able to, after 3 overnights, pull into the harbor. And one of the things that we learned was it's smart that when you first get into harbor, to fuel up as fast as you can, or as soon as you can, before you go find your location, so that you really are ready to go on the next weather window that comes available. So we motored directly over to the fueling station in a manatee area. And if you know what manatees are, they look like bull walruses, but they're indigenous to the US along the Gulf Coast, and they're endangered species. And as we pulled up to fuel up, there was a big sign talking about their fueling system, and be careful not to spill because of the manatees. So we put the spigot in our gas tank and we turned it on, and I would have to go inside the boat and open up a visual port to see how full we were getting. And my wife would be up on deck with the nozzle. And as it came up close, then I would yell to my wife, "Okay, shut it off." Well, what we didn't realize was that when they were talking about their new fuel system, it didn't just shut off. It also shut off and then emptied the hose that ran from the tank itself to the nozzle. So when I said, "Okay, shut it off," we got an additional 6 gallons down our fill pipe. It was already full, and it began to overflow into the manatee waters right there where we were. Well, they had had the experience before, and they had some absorbent material that measured 8 feet and was on 36-foot rolls, and we were able to dip that in and get that fuel out of the water very quickly, but boy, were we ever tired after that. Finally got to go find our anchorage and then sleep for about 12 hours. Once we got there, we went to a marina that we had reservations at and met friends for Christmas, and that's actually where we had Christmas dinner. Peter, how are we doing for time?
Well, we're at about 50. We'll let it down. How long were you underway with the sailing in total?
Well, for the first year, we went from Duluth to Beckway, or Grenada, I should say. Our goal was Venezuela, and we missed it by about 70 miles. But we lived on the boat for 8 years.
Wow.
And from what we would do is go to the U.S. Virgin Islands during the winter times, and then go south for the hurricane season. We'd basically earn enough money to work on the boat and go south and actually physically work on the boat. We spent quite a bit of time in Venezuela. We lived there for 1.5 years. Did a little bit of traveling in South America. When we decided to sell the boat, we weren't ready to come back to Minnesota, so we sold the boat and moved on to the island of St. Croix. At that point, we were there for 1 year, and it was time to start earning some money. So I went out and found a partner and started a property management company because of my real estate experience. And I managed that company for 4 years. And my wife and I had a conversation about, this is nice. I like the constant warm weather, but this is really a small community. And at what point do we do something different with this company and go back someplace else? I bet within a month after that, my partner and I had a huge blow up. So it was taken care of, and we decided to start looking for someplace else to move. And we looked at North Carolina, I actually got online and looked for like the top 100 spots in the US. To my surprise, 6 of the top were in Minnesota. And it's like, well, I've already lived there. And yeah, that's right, it is nice, but I hate the winters. So our goal was to go ahead and move back to Minnesota and find a way that we can earn a living that would allow us to be in Minnesota in the summertime and be south in the wintertime. So during this time, real estate crashed, as everybody knows, and came back here, and the job market was different than what it was when we left. So after a while, it took me a while to realize that I needed to get back into real estate because it was something that I needed to do. So getting back into it, things have changed. Not dramatically. What hasn't changed is that real estate is a person-to-person business, and it's still about relationships. If they don't know me, like me, and trust me, they won't do business with me. But technology has changed, and the Star and Tribune ads are not going to work anymore. So I needed to reformulate my business. In the first year since I've been back, and now I've been back, I'm in my 14th month of being back, I've done a lot of open houses because that's another way to meet first-time home buyers. But it's changed enough. The business has changed enough that even with my age, I realized that I need to start working more with people that own properties now. I associate more closely to those people more than first-time home buyers. And once again, I find myself building my pipelines differently. And it's taking me out of my comfort zone. Anytime that you do something different, you're out of your comfort zone. Working first-time buyers is still my comfort zone. I'm so satisfied doing that, and I'm very knowledgeable about that I can do it in my sleep. What I'm not so comfortable with is the process and systems of the listing process and actually working with sellers in order to do as good a job for them as I do with first-time home buyers. So I've been retraining myself and changing my mindset, and recently hired a real estate coach. This person is specific to real estate. He only works with those agents that sell real estate. He doesn't work with anybody else to build their business, only specifically with real estate. And he is taking me out of my comfort zone and causing me to do those things that need to be done and holding me accountable so that my mindset will change. And I must say that I won't say that I'm an old dog, but learning new tricks is, that's difficult. But it's the mindset and it's the attitude. And it reminds me of when I first got into real estate and how hard it was for me to establish a connection with people that I don't know. It's the same uncomfortableness. But one of the nice things about age and experience is that I know what it is, and I've been through it before. And those of you listening to me now who have some age and have an understanding that I'm old enough, I've had experiences like this, I understand. It's not new. The experience itself and change is not new. Being uncomfortable is not new. But I know that moving forward with it, that there will be rewards. And my experience from sailing also teaches me that it's not just the goal. It's the experience that you get going through to get to the goal. I recently was on the phone with a seller. Their listing had expired, so I called them, and she hung up on me. And I laughed, because it's just part of it. And it's an experience I've been through enough that it's like, okay, that's not even rejection. It's just a part of the experience. Peter, do you have any questions for me?
Gee. Well, I mean, there's the little girl of a friend of mine lives around here. Asked her the other day. She's kind of a little woman, and the girl's like 2. Question is, "Mommy, are you tall enough?"
Are you tall enough?
Are you tall enough? So I just want to ask in closing, has it been good enough?
Yes. Yeah, I would say that it has. There's times that it's been depressing. I mean, with the economy the way that it is, I learned from sailing that you can really do anything that you put your mind to. And when we came back, my confidence was shaken. I will have to say that it was shaken. And that was part of the experience. That was part of the trip, too. Because I realized that I spent so much time trying to get over that. And the dissolution of my business. That was very difficult for me to get over. And now that I've gone through it, I recognize that for what it was. And that I could have rolled with those punches a little bit better. But yes, I always like to think of things in a positive light as much as I can. And I feel like it's worth it. And that I'm enjoying it.